Coming up, the Ben Simmons saga is only a year away from coming to a close for Brooklyn. But is there a reason that the Nets should try to move the often injured veteran sooner than later? We dive in on it all coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast, radio Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbrecht. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. And let you know, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Where we get started is, Doug, maybe the last time we want to have to debate what the Nets should or shouldn't do around Ben Simmons, a familiar theme for this organization with a number of players over the last couple of seasons.
I can almost guarantee it won't be the last time because we probably got a trade deadline we're headed toward. But
like it to be the last
at some point. But obviously, one more season of the Ben Simmons, I think you said saga to start, which is probably a pretty apropos word of sort of like what it's been like with Simmons since he came over in the James Harden trade, which has been, some hope and a lot of disappointment, unfortunately, a lot around injuries that can't be helped. And, just a guy who's been a rather polarizing player for years and years now. I mean, just no other way around it. But the Nets, on some level, it's like the Nets are faced with a tough decision, and on some level they're not, right, with Ben Simmons. I think that when it comes to what can be done, the easy answer is not much, but it does beg the question of like, at what point do you just say, the $40 million that he's owed this year is worth getting off of if it gives us, locked in money on another guy going forward? It's probably a question of who that guy would be, but there are more options, at least with Ben Simmons now, than we once thought there were, even if those options might not be particularly great ones.
Yeah, it's funny because there's been certain situations that even at a lower level, we talked about Dorian Finney-Smith a lot this offseason, the last couple of seasons. Well, being too patient, holding out too long, waiting for the perfect opportunity. When it comes to Ben Simmons, in many ways you go, well, this is when you want to be patient, right? The money's coming off. No reason to panic here. Let's start attaching assets, although we'll talk about some possibilities there. I think to your point, the only world where I look at it as, hey, we're going to move Ben Simmons now, because even with $40 million, is because a player becomes available that has years on a contract going forward, and you want to get him sooner than later. You don't want to maybe go to the off season and try to revisit it at that point where maybe the market gets bigger, the price gets steeper. If we can get a guy now at the deadline, something like that we believe builds in towards the future, I think that's a viable option. But the biggest factor in that is probably this team being competitive this year, right? Looking like they can get to the play-in, can be a playoff, quote-unquote, fringe team. If that happens, then it inspires a different path forward. Short of that, it just feels like season ends, Ben Simmons' time ends with the Nets, and we get to move forward with $40 million in cap space.
Yeah, and they've made it this far. So when the question is like, what should they do with Ben Simmons? I think that probably the overwhelming answer is just ride it out. And it doesn't feel great, but at this point, when you're so close to the sort of proverbial finish line on this contract, with really not a ton of hope in sight on like ever coming back to anything close to what he was, even at like 75% of Ben Simmons. Like when they traded for him, you think back to when they make that trade, when the Harden Simmons trade. And at the time where Simmons is sitting out, presumably for just sort of being pissed off at the team, which I think he had like a real right to be. Now, whether he should have taken it all the way to sitting out once he was under contract, I mean, that one's, that way we could probably debate. But whether or not he had a real gripe with the team, I think he did. He didn't help himself at all with some of the play. He looked totally shot in that Atlanta series when he was still with the Sixers. And the Sixers and Doc Rivers specifically had the easiest thing ever to do at the time, which was they lose the series. Obviously, Simmons dumps the ball off the thigh ball, and it becomes sort of a meme going forward. And the easiest thing ever when Rivers is asked, is he the point guard of the future? Just say yes. Just say yes, even if you don't mean it. These guys lie all the time. All these guys do is lie. Like, all you had to do is lie. and just say, yeah. And then you trade him or you just do whatever and he's not later. And he's like, I mean, he gave some version of like, I don't really know. And that was kind of the end of it. And so
Yeah.
I'm not saying Simmons is totally innocent here, but it did seem like coming out of that Philly time, it was mostly just like, oh, Philly just screwed up so bad with their wording around like sort of his future
Yeah.
there. And that, but no one really foresaw at that point just the sheer number of injuries that he would have, from basically that point on. And that, combined with probably some other stuff that might be, Simmons in his own head related, like this has been a total disaster. And I do question about like how much of it you could have seen coming, right? Like, I think like that's the part that I don't know, short of getting the medicals and knowing all out, I think it was hard to totally discern that at the time.
No, of course. Listen, 2020, 2021, 12th in MVP voting, second defensive player of the year voting. And that's the last time that Ben Simmons was talked about positively on the basketball court. And to your point, we always reflect back on things and say, well, obviously you should never have made that deal if you knew at the time what was going to become of Ben Simmons. Now the question as we dial it forward, and we'll get into your coming up, is regardless of what you think, can he be healthy, all the workout videos over the course of every single summer, he's going to be 28 years old in a week. He's going to be 28 years old. He's played 57 games for the Brooklyn Nets over the last 2 seasons, and he's in the last year of this contract. What does it look like going forward for him? And in terms of the Brooklyn Nets and making any decisions around him, how can you trust that as this year starts, he'll give you 20 games, 25 games, not even where he's electric, not where he's elite, where he's just on the court and available to maybe entice a team at a reduced contract rate to take a flyer on him? All of these things seem incredibly unlikely, but there are maybe paths where the Brooklyn Nets can force another team's hand because of the capital that they have in their coffers right now. We'll get into all that coming up here in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, I'll tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. Look, summertime means baseball. You got the NBA Finals going, so much more. You can bet it all on FanDuel right now. New customers are going to get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you can use to bet everything from the Finals MVP, which is actually a really interesting race as it's starting to shake down on FanDuel as the odds get a little closer here. Probably all on Boston guys between Tatum, Drew Holiday. You got Jaylen Brown in there. I don't mind the Jaylen Brown odds if you're trying to go who might just step forward and shine over these last couple games. If you think Boston's going to take it, it's all there for you over on FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Add a big win to your summer bucket list. Again, FanDuel.com/LockedOn. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.
All right, so as we continue on today's Locked On Nets episode, talking about our old friend Ben Simmons. I mentioned there, you go back these last 2 seasons, one of the things is as well, like even with the injuries. So if you want to be optimistic and say, well, but if he comes back again this time, maybe there's something there. It's worth noting that it's like some of the little areas you want to see him improve, they've gotten worse, like free throw shooting. That got worse year over year these last 2 seasons with the Brooklyn Nets. The scoring hasn't been there even when he's been fully healthy for these very small stints. The rebounding hasn't necessarily been there. Last season in a very small sample size, it looked good. The assist numbers, like everything that you also pointed to. And again, 57 games, it's not like we're talking about a true 2-year sample size, but everything you look at with him, you go, at least I say, I can't guarantee that Ben Simmons in a lot of areas is going to be as good as he was, even just in certain categories, let alone in the most important ones. The facilitating, the court running, like that stuff is there. But as you and I both know over these last 2 seasons in those samples, when he doesn't have the athleticism, when he doesn't have the attack, it does diminish the court vision and the ability to set other players up because he's just not as dangerous a player as for the other team. So I look at him as, even if he was 100% healthy walking in this year, you'd still go, okay, what is that? We don't know what that 28-year-old after 2 years of back injuries, Ben Simmons, looks like if he stepped on the court for the Nets.
Yeah, and actually, and so part of like this, like the idea of like what should the Nets do with Ben Simmons, right? It's like, I think we started off by saying you probably got to end up riding the contract out, right? But if you're riding the contract out, the next question goes along with what you just posited is like, what's his role going into the season, right? So last year it was, well, he's going to be the starter, and we're going to sort of build things around him, and maybe some of the offensive capabilities, and there's going to be a lot of DHO stuff, and we'll kind of see if he can get to the rim, and it's going to be court vision, pace, and space, and maybe we can get on some hit aheads, and that's where he's really going to be shining. And then obviously, there's times where it looks okay and there's times where it's not. I think what we can definitively say is he cannot be in the starting lineup to start the season. I think
Oh,
that
God,
should
no. Yeah.
probably be a foregone conclusion. And it's totally crazy to think that your most expensive player would not start. I mean, this never happens in the NBA. Even the bad contracts, the guys still start. Like if you think about the worst, most expensive contracts on the books right now, the Zach LaVines, the Bradley Beals, whatever you think of these guys, there's no question they're
When
at least
healthy.
starting. I mean,
Yep.
when healthy, they're
play.
starting, right?
Yep.
It's not even a question, right? Now you can question how good your team can be when they're your most expensive player and they're starting. Okay, but not the question is never not whether or not they're going to be starting. I don't think the Nets can enter a world where he's in the starting lineup. I just don't see how it helps them. I don't see there's not been a long enough track record of him staying healthy. You have to sort of adjust your style pretty significantly when he's around there. If they re-sign Claxton, it's a for sure he cannot start. They cannot play those two guys together at all. It's just that one's not even a question to me. So if Claxton gets re-signed and it's looking like he's really going to, I think that probably makes the decision easier. But I don't think there's any world where even if he breaks camp, you're like, oh my God, he's so healthy. I just don't think you can do it. I just think there has to be focus on some of these other guys. And if you get something from him as off the bench, great. But other than that, any reliance on him as a core piece of them, I just think it should just be considered sort of found money more than anything else, which is nuts. He makes $40 million a year, but I just don't see it any other way.
And as it stands right now, because I agree with you, it's go and look at the Nets depth chart right now, right? Let's assume we've seen some positive things from Dennis Schroeder. He wants to be a part of the organization if he can stay here. If you think that the backcourt is going to be Schroeder, Thomas, then you have Mikal Bridges. Let's assume Dorian Finney-Smith is gone. We're going to do a whole episode about Noah Clowney and why he needs to be in that starting lineup, and Nick Claxton. To your point, there's not a player starting him over Noah Clowney would be, to me, insane, and moving Nicholas Claxton to a pseudo for whatever it's going to look like backcourt, all this nonsense of his positionless nature with Ben Simmons. But okay, fine. I'll even go a step further, though, why it is a problem for the Nets. Going to the second unit. What is that? You're still waiting for the defined player. We just did the episode on Trendon Watford and bringing him back. Is he deserving of consistent minutes? Putting Ben Simmons in that second unit, there's a world where it's also a detriment to the second unit guys and to the young guys, Jalen Wilson that's going to come in and play. It's a detriment if you want to still have Dennis Smith Jr. back on this roster, who's not an offensive-minded player. That's really where the issue comes in for Ben Simmons in terms of even short-term value for the Brooklyn Nets. We saw how clunky it makes your rotations. Day'Ron Sharpe, that's another problem playing with Ben Simmons at times. So you're going to keep this player. He's incredibly expensive. We get that. But this is the case for why, do you sacrifice something to get off of him? Because when you look at the depth chart as it's currently constructed, you see these potential pitfalls where you stunt and hurt the growth of other players on your roster because this guy has a specific area inside of his skill set that needs a very specific set of players around him. And those are elite talents. Those are Kevin Durant's and Kyrie Irving's and James Harden's. That's when a Ben Simmons can still be beneficial to you, even without having a shot when it comes to the offensive game.
All right, so I'll push back a little bit on that because I think that while I agree with part of it, I don't agree with all of it. So I think there are worlds where he does help some of these other guys. I think that if he was a fully healthy version of yourself, or let's say an 75% version of it, of what I don't think we're never getting back to the old version. Let's just say he's 70% of what he was or something like that. I think there are lineups where he would be helpful even in that current form. I don't think they include Nick Claxton. I don't think they include Day'Ron Sharpe. But if it was Noah Clowney plus Jalen Wilson, I'm just thinking some 3-and-D wing spacers, guys who can, because Clowney helps here that he can space the floor a little bit. So I think that pairing is probably okay. You can you don't need to have you don't need to have Simmons as the low man all the time. He can, he can get into the paint and play center in Clowney and not kill you with your spacing. I think that would actually be, those are lineups I think I'd be fine with. Simmons plus Clowney plus Cam Johnson, Bridges, Cam Thomas. I think that lineup would work if Simmons was healthy. So I don't think he's a detriment to all lineup combinations. But again, I started that by saying, look, if you bring Claxton back for sure, you cannot start him, right? Like,
Right.
and then if
Yeah,
you're
as
or if you're
currently
gonna go
constituted.
or if you're gonna go traditional five, like me, Daron Sharp, or they signed a center, you cannot start him. I
Right.
think there are lineups where he could still help because we still did see some of that last year. Like the assist numbers were still good. He
Yeah.
was still
Yeah,
pushing
last year was the
pace.
one good category.
He pushed pace off misses and makes. I think that that's desperately need guys to push the pace. I don't have anyone else that can do it. So I think there are worlds where he does help some lineups. I was mostly just starting with you can't start him like that. That's like
Yeah.
that. It's going to be 50. Let's start with 15 minutes off the bench and keep the expectations really pretty low.
Yeah, that's probably fair. And again, like the the pushback on your pushback of my pushback would be, it's not even that you say there are certain things that he can do well. I guess I look at this is actually also a commentary on the Nets roster, and I say
Yeah.
superstar talents around him to make it easier. But then it's also okay. So Ben Simmons, you say, pushes the pace, and he's in the second unit, and he's driving the lane, and the defenders are staying at home on the outside shooters. Okay, Cameron Johnson, I thought that his next phase was going to be a little more getting at the basket and taking a couple of players off the dribble on defensive matchups. That didn't entirely come to fruition. He had some injuries. Jalen Wilson, we say, he's at half a step too slow sometimes on the offensive end to really make that commitment. So that would be my concern. I agree with you where he should start and where the expectations should be. My concern is then that because the talent on the roster and obviously the talent from the starting unit to the second unit gets a little bit diminished, as you would expect in the NBA, then Ben Simmons, it becomes a little less valuable because those guys can't quite do the extra thing. It's the same reason we talk about Mikal Bridges. Ben Simmons drives and kicks. Now take your man off the dribble because the defense is out of sorts and you can get at the basket. Well, you can't quite do that consistently. So it does, in some ways, reflect on the Brooklyn Nets roster and saying even maximizing what Ben Simmons could be at 75% of his old self, maximizing that he pushes the pace, that he can facilitate, he sees the floor so well. That somewhat does get diminished because you're on the Brooklyn Nets. And that's kind of the ultimate irony here, that even though you're here and you maybe can't get moved, we also can't make the most out of what your talent might be if you're back on the floor. That's my biggest concern here. Yeah.
No, I think that's totally right. Like, and we talked about this. This has been a theme that we talked about with many of the Nets guys. Anytime we talk about guys on an individual level, we end up running into this little roadblock of, everyone has their merits, but on this team, it just gets a little harder because of how the team construction. It's poorly constructed. Some by circumstance, like it's poorly constructed on certain levels. It's mismatched pieces. The Claxton Simmons piece is always the one that's like the best mention. It's like, even those two guys might be two of your five best players when fully healthy, and playing them together is a total disaster. Right. So, and it just doesn't work. It doesn't work.
As classic NBA rosters are built.
Yeah, exactly. And that's just like this, this like sort of not feedback loop, this loop that the Nets have gotten themselves into with some of the personnel. All right, we'll talk about possible trades that might be out there, what ultimately the decisions on Ben Simmons should be. We'll get into that here in a second. First, let you know the show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Look, we're all carrying around stressors in our life. The big ones, the small ones, we can keep them bottled up. But sometimes it just starts to affect us really negatively. It doesn't need to be just the big things that affect you negatively. The small stuff can really start to build up on you. Therapy is what you need. It's a safe space to get things off your chest, to figure out how to work through whatever's weighing you down. This is where BetterHelp can jump in and really just be just like a thing that you go to. It's consistent. It's making sure you're talking about all those things in your life, big and small. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient. It's flexible. It's totally suited to your schedule. All you got to do, you just fill out a brief questionnaire. You're going to get matched with a licensed therapist. Switch those therapists at any time. No additional charge. Want to find someone that works with you and for you. Get it off your chest with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off of your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA.
All right, so as we tie a bow on the Locked On Nets episode, talking about, of course, Ben Simmons and the future for the Brooklyn Nets, what it means in the short and long term. Listen, if you follow the show, you know that we believe it's going to be another pretty rough season for the Nets, but then the money comes in, and then the 2025 draft class comes in, and are they going to get some picks back and everything that they want to try to do here? So on the one hand, you can say, ride it out, don't worry about it. But if there's a player that you can go get that if you're the Nets, you think helps you in the short term, if you're just, quite frankly, frustrated and don't want to have Ben Simmons around anymore for issues of his own from a basketball standpoint and issues of physical, injuries that you can't, put against him in that regard. Are there any situations you can think of, Doug, where the Nets would pull the trigger on it or would be willing to attach an asset to it? Like what's your threshold for this? We've done this before in years past. I think yours is pretty low in terms of willingness to add to Ben Simmons to move Ben Simmons.
Well, you definitely do not want to, take on worse money to get off his money, right? So, like, I would never consider the Levine piece of this, or like I mentioned Bradley Beal, or like these other sort of like toxic contracts at this point. There's no chance I would add more money. Go ahead. There's no more chance I would add like more bad money going out more years.
I'll throw out a baseline here. 2 years remaining on John Collins. The Utah Jazz have been speculated they want to move him this offseason if they could. Now, is that palatable from the Jazz standpoint? That's a different part of the discussion. But 2 years, north of $26 million for John Collins.
Probably not. I think I want to just be as clean a cap as possible. I mean, everything they've been doing is clean cap of 25, 26. So really anything that compromises it, short of a guy that I know for sure is going to be a great piece. Like, and yeah, I don't think I would do it. I just think at this point they've written out so long that just coming fully clean, that getting anything back that's either more years, the same money, sending out a Phoenix pick or something, or any pick, like to get off. I don't think they would never send a Phoenix pick to get off Simmons, but anything, I just would never. I just don't think you can do it. You made it this far. It's been all bad. It's been a total F, but like you shouldn't compound the F by making it so you have another possible F, a year later when you could just be clean, right? Like I just think. I don't know. I just don't think they could. They probably got lucky to some degree that honestly, in some ways, they probably got lucky that the team has stunk over the last year, like with this specific situation. Like, had they been good or playing above their weight, they might have been motivated to attach something to him to bring back to like sort of make marginal gains. I think they probably got saved that they were horrible last year. And then they just like, oh, what are we going to do? Like attach more to get off this now? Like, why bother? We already stink. If they had been 500, like they could have talked themselves into doing it. I think they probably got saved by just being bad. So there you go. There's a positive.
There's a positive. So bad, it turned out good. Yeah, and I think too, it's like getting across the end of last season. That was the quote finish line for not feeling like you need to do something with Ben Simmons, right? Once you got to the last year, it's like, well, we're here. We're here. Now it's just let this season play out. He's healthy for a little bit. He gets on the court for a little bit. He doesn't. Great. Like, you can dream on. He looks good enough, and some team wants to take a flyer on him at the trade deadline. Like that's maybe the last.
Sorry, or you get like contract year Ben Simmons, where it's just like he kind of sees his NBA future written on the wall here, and he needs to do something. And this is not a Ben Simmons thing. I mean, contract years, I guess are real things. And your motivation, they're human beings. Your motivation changes as you get closer to possibly needing to like get another job, right? So I don't know. Like there's some world where they get as good of a version as you could possibly get from him just because he's like, what's next for me? I don't know. Like, is there another contract coming? It's like, it's not totally clear.
Well, okay. So the last two things I'll mention is one, from an asset standpoint, if you're going to look at anything, and I think I tend to agree with you. I might be a little bit more on the side. John Collins is the example. It doesn't mean he's the player. I wouldn't hate having a couple of seasons of a player on the books extending into the 2025 off season if I think that it does help in the grand scheme of who you're going to go after, what are you going to bring in next, and he's a good players that you think can be healthy and can contribute. So I wouldn't be totally against that avenue. One quick note is maybe it's the Dallas first round pick or the Philly first round pick. Like there's probably a limit to where I go. You mentioned not touching the Phoenix picks if you were going to go into the assets. Not saying that I would do that. But the other part of it here then is, to your point, I don't even need, I need 2 months of contract year Ben Simmons. I need enough to entice somebody. Maybe that's like the short-term best case scenario is Ben Simmons looks healthy-ish coming back, has a role, not overstated, playing 25, 30 minutes a night, 15, 20 coming off the bench. And by the time you get to the deadline and the Nets have absorbed some of the final year of the contract, a team will look and say, we don't need to have you attach anything for us to take a flyer on him for half a season. He may be just worth it at X dollars for our playoff team for him to come in and, hey, listen, he can play some really great defense for you and he can facilitate off the bench. Like you probably have to reframe it that way from another team standpoint. Is this guy worth I don't know what the money's going to be, $20 million for a half a season to come off the bench for 15, 20 minutes and specifically be told, you are here to defend players on a versatile level and to facilitate for other players. You have to have the right roster, but maybe some team will squint and convince themselves, especially if you're like a 6 to 8 seed in the West or something. Hey, we're not going to win a championship this year. Maybe he gets us a win in the playoff round that we don't anticipate because he locks down one player for 7 possessions over 2 games. Like, I don't think it's hard to see NBA teams being willing to take a chance on that, knowing that it's only a chance for half a year. It's only a chance for right now. And then it's gone. And then it's over. And the cost for the Nets would be anything at all. A second-round pick. Done. Great. We're so happy.
I don't think there's any chance of that. Like I would say, I don't think. I would say that the chances of that to me are so low that I get it. You're an optimist. Call me a pessimist. Call me glass all the way empty.
Me an optimist. You just said that Ben Simmons has a contract year. How dare you, sir?
I think. Yeah, I still think that would not like get them. I don't think any.
If he was we'll end on this. If he was having a contract type year to start the season for Brooklyn, right? You're saying no team would at the trade deadline say, hey, like, we'll take a half-year flyer on this guy.
Oh, God, I think it'd have to be so awesome. Like, I think because I think what we're forgetting maybe is forget just the stats and forget the guy carries around like such a negative vibe when it comes to like just not him as a person, but just like him as a player. I mean, he's not even polarizing at this point. It's like kind of a joke. It's like it's kind of a it's like we're another round of posting on Instagram of like lifting weights. Like, come on, right? Like, and so I think that like a front office, like even if he was amazing, the front office, it's still like a Herculean lift to like tell the correct story about it because he's got like another story that maybe is not even basketball related around him at this point. And so I think that that's where I think that's even the harder part. And so I know that I was like dreaming on, maybe a contract year. And I'm not trying to like just, dig you for also having some kind of like positive view. It was mostly just like, I'm mostly just want to mention that I think there's this other thing around him that it's like, I was gonna say it's not dissimilar to like Kyrie. It's like, well, we're forgetting that there was like other stuff that might have gotten in the way of like the value piece, and it had very little to do with the basketball court. Like there was a way to view him in non-basketball terms that affects sort of like the overall story.
Right.
It's not the same, but it's like similar. And that's like, there's non-basketball things here that seem to tell another part of the story. And that people might just not want to do business. And it's worth like way less to be able to have to do business with it. That's all.
Oh, for sure. And by the way, like even in any of this, I'll close on it. One, that is my dream on scenario, right? You're saying like dreaming on him having a contract year. I'm dreaming that he's healthy and he looks decent and he plays, for 2 months and some team goes, that's kind of interesting. We'd like to be a little bit better. We'll take a look at him. That is the dream case scenario. But for Brooklyn, it's going to be that push and pull even at that point, because this is why I find it so fascinating. It's, hey, second round pick, you took Ben Simmons, great. Or we gave you somebody that we didn't like. Maybe we attached Day'Ron Sharpe because we're not going to re-sign him in the long term. Like, you try to facilitate this version of it, but the Nets will get romanced by a version of Ben Simmons that looks decent for the short term. Because even though you and I agree they're going towards 2025 and clearing the cap and having all these opportunities, they also went into last season saying, we want to compete, we want to make the playoffs, we want to be a good team. We're keeping Mikal Bridges, we're keeping Cameron Johnson, we're sticking with the core that we have. So, like, get ready, Brooklyn, for, Ben Simmons to look kind of decent and have to hear post-game press conferences for the first half of the season where they're like, well, obviously it's been a long road for him, but this is the player we hoped we could have, and we know that he can contribute to this roster, even if it's coming off the bench. That narrative is exactly what we're going to hear if Ben Simmons is healthy and capable of playing to start the season in Brooklyn. And that, as much as anything, is a reason for Brooklyn to explore the options of trading him so that Doug and I don't have to talk about that during the year.
There we go. That's the whole dream, buddy. Just to talk about only the great version of it. And if not, like, let's just move on. Okay, we're going to get out of here. Much appreciated everyone rocking with us through the off season. Got a couple cool things, some crossover stuff on tap going over the next couple days, which we're excited about. In the meantime, just make sure that you're subscribed to Locked On Nets wherever you listen to the podcast. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Nets on YouTube as well.
And of course, when it comes to Ben Simmons, we know that the older we get, the fewer things seem worth waiting for. And that is one Bill Rogers.
Oh, one of the all-time great poets. We're back again tomorrow. Talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball.